Hello, my name is Julie, and today I'm going to be talking about the 12 books that I read in March. So I didn't read nearly as many pages as I read in previous months, but I have read more books, and that's because I read only one book that was over 400 pages. I read a couple of novella length books. I don't know, it's felt weird. I had to do some traveling, and I'm gonna be doing a lot of traveling in the next couple months, so I don't even know what my reading's gonna be like. I've been struggling to actually keep my eyes on the page and my mind on the page, so hopefully we can turn that around. Here are the stats of this month. I read 12 books, read 3,760 pages, had an average rating of 3.59, had 2 5-stars, an average page count of 313 pages, an average pages per day of 121. I read 5 books from my shelf, added 8 books to my TBR, so I have an annual net TBR shelf of negative. I read just about every genre this month. I only read standalones though. I read mostly adult books, more physical than audiobook, and my star ratings were a pretty average bell curve. Let's go quickly. Let's start with our first book, Tripping Arcadia by Kit Mayquist. This is a book that I read for my 12 Friends 12 Books 12 Months challenge, and I totally get why this was recommended to me. This is about a girl who has been taken from her dreamlike life of working in the Italian countryside with her aunt, working on studying ancient poisons, to having to go back to her family in New England who are suddenly broke when her father is injured on the job and then fired immediately, and she needs to find a job to help support them, and she ends up getting a doctor's assistant position for a rich family. And this family is very strange, and she starts to have very conflicting feelings about them one way and the other. This is a weird book, and I totally get why it was recommended to me, because the first half of this book I was really into, and I could see ties to other weird fiction books that I've read, like Bunny, Mona Awad type stuff. But I think that this book really stagnated. We have, at the beginning, we have so much beautiful language and intrigue about different things that are going on, and there is I don't know if I'd go so far as to say plot twist, but there is a change around maybe the 1/3 or 1/2 mark that really took me aback, and then nothing else was surprising from there on out. I don't really know if I categorize this as a mystery or a thriller. It says it's gothic, which I do think matches it, but I don't think it had enough mystery or enough thriller or enough horror, and it wasn't literary enough to just be general fiction. So I think that this is an author that I could keep my eye out for, but I ultimately don't think that this really executed upon what it was trying to do, trying to be surprising, trying to get you to fall in love with these characters. I don't think it really got there. So I gave this a 3-star, and I would look out for future titles from this author. Then I read The Wisteria Society for Lady Scoundrels by India Holton. I picked this up because this almost made the book club's pick for this month, and it was the one that I wanted to read, so I just decided to pick it up anyway. And this is a strange book that is about people in Victorian society finding magic that makes it so they can fly houses around. Basically, that changes pirating from being about boats and only being mostly a masculine thing to women being pirates all the time and having these manor houses that are the ships. Very weird. It's also a romance where our main character is trying to be a part of this Wisteria Society and trying to prove herself. Meanwhile, this pirate man has been tasked with assassinating her. It took me a minute to get into this, which I think I have that case with a lot of British comedic books, that it takes me a minute to actually get the humor into my mind and for it to compute. But I ended up liking it by the end, and I did think that the romance was the strongest part of this book. I liked their dynamic, and I definitely thought they had chemistry, and I really wanted them to get together. However, I think the world building was really lacking in this book. I think it goes too far into the fantasy plot for it to not actually develop on it. I feel like we are introduced to the magic that I just told you about in the very beginning, and then it doesn't develop at all. And we just have people fighting each other in these houses, but I also don't feel like I have a very good idea of what the houses are like and how they work. The strongest point of this book is the romance and the comedy. A lot of the comedy coming from these Victorian ladies being prim and proper, but also lying, stealing, cheating. So, and also there is a character that is very much like Mr. Woodhouse from Emma, which I thought was really funny. So this was a really good airplane read for me, which I did get to do, but I think it could have done more with what it had to make it extremely successful. With Tripping Arcadia, I really liked the beginning, didn't love the end, and with this one, I wasn't super into the beginning, but by the end, I was won over by some aspects of it, so I think they're about even. 3 stars. Then I read 3 books for my latest vlog, which was about reading books from authors that I've given 5 stars to before. If you would like to watch it, that video is here, but I'm going to very quickly go through my thoughts on this. I read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang after reading The Poppy War and then reading and being obsessed with Babel. And this is a satire about a white woman who, after seeing her author friend who is Asian and much more successful than her, collapse and die in front of her, steals her manuscript that's supposed to be her magnum opus and publishes it as her own. We flip through the process of writing this book and this book getting published and the book getting toured and her trying to work on other projects, going over the course of years of her doing anything to avoid thinking about how she is actually an awful person doing awful things. This is a satire, so our main character is terrible and racist and does a lot of bad things, and you are not supposed to root for her. R.F. Kuang does a fantastic job of giving us our main character's perspective without condoning it. She shows us how twisted the main character's mind is and how warped it is from reality, while also being able to show us what the reality is. And I think that was a really hard balance to hit. I was so angry when reading this book. I am giving it a 5 stars because I think it did exactly the things that it wanted to do. Even though Babel is still my favorite of hers, and I don't know how long like some of the characterization stuff is going to stay with me, I really enjoyed it. Then I read Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead after loving both In My Dreams I Hold a Knife and The Last Housewife. And this is a Southern Gothic mystery about our main character who is a preacher's kid in a very small town and has really been disrupted by that. And she has a best friend from when she was young who is sort of the town black sheep. They did something that they have been covering up, and now the town seems to be unearthing some of the things that they might have been associated with, or maybe it's entirely new things that don't have anything to do with them. So I knew that this was her lowest rated thriller going into this, and I still thought I had the chance of loving it, but right off the bat I could tell I wasn't. I really didn't get on with our main characters. I think she does write female protagonists that are complicated and do things that you might not agree with, but like this character I just like couldn't get on board with. I didn't think the mystery was done very well, and I think the synopsis that this book is giving is so misleading. It focuses on things that aren't even important in the book. And I just think that this was really marketed the wrong way. I didn't like the characters, I didn't like the mystery. I think this is trying to have a difficult conversation like her other books have, but it does not succeed. It's talking about religious trauma and it doesn't go very far into it. It just kind of wraps it up at the end, and I think that there were a lot of missed opportunities here. I gave it a 3. I think there were some things that you could enjoy. There were some things that weren't absolutely terrible, but it just really let me down. The last book for the vlog was An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. This is the author of A Dowry of Blood, which is a retelling of Dracula, and this takes place in the same universe. This is a retelling of Carmilla, which I have not read, but you don't need to have read to read this. This is about our main character, Laura, who goes to a new college for girls and gets wrapped up in the poetry professor and this girl who she is fighting for first place, essentially, with, who is named Carmilla. And it turns out that Carmilla and the professor have a deeper relationship where the professor is a vampire and Carmilla is the person that she feeds off of. And so while Laura and Carmilla are having this really tense rivalry situation where they're kind of also falling in love with each other, the professor is very jealous of their connection. I think that this is perfectly marketed as the companion to Dowry in Blood. It is not the same. I don't think it's quite as good. Dowry of Blood is very singularly focused, and I think it really succeeded in that. And this is about the same length, but it is less singularly focused, and so I think it did less with the time that it had. I did really like the relationship between Laura and Carmilla. If you're a type of person who likes the knife to the throat, rivals to lovers type thing, this could be something you're into. I really liked the tone. I loved the language. There were so many quotes that I wanted to come back to, but I just wanted a little bit more oomph. So this is getting a 4.5 from me. Then I listened to A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. This is a modern classic dystopian fiction that is about our main character Alex in a dystopian future where there is a epidemic of teenagers being extremely violent, forming gangs, and we are in the mind of someone who is consumed by this violence and wants to keep perpetrating it until he is captured by the state and they are trying to condition him out of it. There are definitely some things I can really appreciate about this book. I think the publishing history about this is very fascinating. So the 21st chapter, where our main character like sees the light, was actually taken out of the original American editions. Now what you read does have the 21st. That aspect of thinking about why people would want to take out that chapter was interesting. Personally, I do think that that chapter would be there. I do think that it is very sudden that our main character starts seeing the light of day, and I would have liked a little bit more build-up over the course of the third act. This was really hard to read. The depictions of violence and rape were really awful on purpose. Alex has to come to terms with the terrible things that he's doing, so you have to see the things that he has to come to terms with. So it's really hard. I know what the author is going for with the themes and everything, that ultimately if you do not have a choice between good and evil, you cannot be good. And while I think that was a really good message, I think there were some implications that were left there I didn't necessarily agree with. That like the only reason that someone wants to perpetrate violence is because that they're a teenager and they'll just grow out of it. I don't know. I thought it was good. I don't really know what to rate it. I think, I don't know, like a 3.5, 3.75. It was a classic. I get why it's stuck around. Then for my book club, 3 of Clubs, we read The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. This was for our historical fantasy hand. This was voted on by the members, and this is inspired by medieval Hungary and very, very heavily inspired by the religious conflict in the area at that time. Our main character, Eva Kay, is a pagan girl, and she lives in a small village where every year a woodsman, people from the king of this nation that's trying to take them over, kidnaps one girl and takes them to the king. When it is revealed that they want to take a seer, which is the most powerful type of magician that they have, the village decides that they are going to pretend that Eva Kay is that seer, even though she is the only person that doesn't have any powers. Trick the kingdom, not actually give them the power. And Eva Kay ends up being with these woodsmen who are the type of people who like killed her family. The group ends up being attacked and she is left alone with the captain, who turns out to be the disgraced prince of that kingdom. And they are going to try to take down his father, keep everyone alive. So we have the pagan group, the empire, the kingdom that is trying to take them over, is very clearly supposed to be a Christian nation in the way that they talk about their God, in the way that they have religious practices, and there is the mega obvious Jewish faith. So far that they actually still use the word rabbi. Like, you couldn't have come up with something else. The discussion of the religious conflict and the sort of hypocrisy when it comes to people believing the same thing, even though they are of different faiths. Being like, oh, well, I believe this because of my God, and you believing the exact same thing because of your God means that you're evil. And I think that was an interesting thing to base an entire book around. I was not invested in the romance between our two main characters. The plot, I didn't love the first half as much as I was interested in the second half when we're actually traversing the city. I think that those religious discussions were really interesting, especially like an author, especially a debut author, a young woman debut author, not being afraid to go for those types of difficult discussions and really not pulling punches when it comes to a lot of the violence that happens in this book. But I wish that the other parts of this book were more fleshed out, or maybe just more to my taste. So I ended up giving this, oh goodness, another 3. Then I listened to Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is a nonfiction, memoir-y type book that is written as the author writing to his teenage son about their Blackness and how they are, between the generations, experiencing that Blackness differently, but how violence is still perpetrated against the Black body by American tradition. It is not against American values that all of these terrible things are happening to Black people. It is part of American values. This is really short. I listened to it on a slow speed. It's narrated by the author, and I just thought this was extremely powerful. As a white woman, I think it's important for me to read things like this to be a better ally, and I think that this was just a very poignant and short, to the point book about Coates' own journey of activism and how he grew and interacted with his Blackness over the course of his life. And I just thought that the way that this was organized and written was perfect. Like, I did really think that this did exactly what it set out to do in the best way that it could. And I completely agree about all the awards that it got. I highly recommend looking at Own Voices reviews of this book, and I did give this a 5-star because I found it very impactful. Then I read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This is a historical fiction with a little tiny ounce of speculative. It is about Shakespeare's family. If you don't know about me, I am a huge Shakespeare fan. Obviously, I studied him regularly in school, but I love his stuff so much that I took Shakespeare classes for fun in college and like nailed all the exams for fun. This is a book about Shakespeare that never says Shakespeare by name, and it is about his family. 95% of this is speculation because there is so little that we know about even Shakespeare, but the people in his life, we know so little except for basically when they were born, when they were married, when they died. And Hamnet, who was Shakespeare's only son, died at age 11. 4 years later, Shakespeare put out his play Hamlet. And at the time, the names Hamlet and Hamnet were essentially the same name. So this is sort of speculation about what was going on in his family, specifically about his wife, what his wife's life was like, marrying Shakespeare and being separated from him for so long and experiencing the death of the child, and then incredibly impactful thing that it must have been for your husband to put your son's death on the world stage. Definitely thought that this was going to be more about Hamnet, but I understand that that was why that was the title, because that is the most attention-grabbing title it could have had. Thought it was really interesting, the choices that our author made about Shakespeare's wife's life. Like, there are conflicting scholarship about what her name actually was, and if Shakespeare was seeing more than one woman. Was it a shotgun wedding? Like, some things that we do know for a fact are that she was pregnant by the time that they got married, but the question is, was Shakespeare under duress? And I think that there are some really poignant choices made by the author about characterizing this woman that we will never know anything more about, which was so heartbreaking to me. All I wanted to do while reading this book was see what was actually true, and there's so little that we actually know. But I thought that this was a very good look at womanhood at the time and alienation, a mother's love for her child, and sort of complicated family relationships. So I really did enjoy this. I think I was looking for a little bit more from it, especially in the back half, and I totally get why people have been really loving this. So I have it at a 4 right now, and depending on how long this stays with me, it could change. Then I found out, like, way too late that the trans rights readathon was going on. I didn't know until it was basically already happening. I'm in the middle of this book. I didn't have anything else on my TBR for the month, so I just decided to pick up some trans authors that I had been hearing about or had read before. So I read The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White, and this is a YA historical fiction horror that is about our main character Silas, who is a trans boy in the Victorian age, I believe. Spirits exist and people can see spirits, but girls are not allowed to, and Silas, having been raised as a girl, is sent away to a reform school for girls when it is discovered that he has been trying to do spirit things. Silas also really wants to be a surgeon like his brother, and there is a lot of really dark language as Silas sees a lot of things through the lens of medicine and medical aspects. So I should not have read this book. From the very opening chapters, there are really specific descriptions of medical gore. There were trigger warnings at the beginning of the book. The author said in the trigger warnings, don't read this book if it's going to like upset you and you're not going to be okay with it. And I decided to read the medical gore anyway because I wanted to know how the story ended. I really did. I had to keep shutting this audiobook off because medical gore is just about the only thing that I cannot read. I can read so many horrible things. I think it's easier when you're reading it on a page rather than the audiobook, because in the page you can just skip ahead and it's a little harder to do that on an audiobook because you don't know what you're missing. But the descriptions of this were so disgusting to me. I actively became short of breath while listening, and I will not force myself to read another book with medical gore again. So I will not be rating this book because of that. But otherwise, if that's something you can handle, I do think this book is worth a read. This is young adult, which I felt was weird for having such intense descriptions, but our characters are young, so. But it's really awful seeing our main character be treated so poorly because he is trans and autistic and doesn't fit in with other people. Other people are really just trying to force him to be the perfect woman that he knows that he cannot be, and it's really destructive and makes him turn to a lot of dark things. This is inspired by medical experimentation that has gone on in history against women who had hysteria, or specifically Black people and people of color, just experimenting on them, and the sort of reform schools to, pray the gay away sort of thing. And it was really harrowing. If the medical descriptions were left out of this, I would have really appreciated this book and be recommending it widely, but I had physical, visceral reactions to the medical descriptions. I've heard really good things about the first book that this author wrote, so if those descriptions aren't present in that book, I would be interested in reading it, but if that is the case for all of his works, I will be skipping. It's the one thing I can't do. Then I read Autonomous by Annalee Newitz, which if you've been watching me for a while, you know this green spine has been haunting me for years now, and I am tired of not having read it, and I finally did. This is a futuristic sci-fi where capitalism has progressed so much that everything and anything can be owned. One of our characters is a person who goes against all of the huge patents that the medical field has on different types of medicine, and she reverse engineers a productivity drug and gives it out on the streets for money, and that drug starts killing people. People are starting to work themselves to death, literally killing other people in the process. The group of people who reverse engineer the drug are trying to take down the people that put out the drug in the first place. And then we also have a group who are working on behalf of the government trying to take down these people who are anti-patent terrorists. I think Annalee Newitz has some of the most unique fiction I've ever read. I think this is probably the most mundane of the three. I think a lot of our conversations about patents and people owning things and companies owning things so that the people who don't have access to such resources will suffer, I think that was interesting. We also have a robot main character who is trying to live in a world that is dominated by humans and is constantly faced with the fact that they are other. And I really liked that part. I didn't love the pacing of this. I thought a lot of the discussions around the drug that we're trying to shut down or fix is really redundant. We keep seeing the same thing happen over and over again. I did like the cat and mouse aspect of us following two people, somebody who's hiding and somebody who's chasing, but I did not like that one of the main plot lines in this is a romance between a human and a robot, and my problem is not that the character is a robot. My problem is that the person who is the human does not treat the robot correctly. I don't know if it is the goal of the author to make us romanticize it, but I think it's really shitty how the human treats the robot and doesn't accept the robot for who they are, that they are a robot, and just wants to think about them as a human and in human terms, and isn't open to really reflecting on this person that they say they love. I liked the capitalist critique, even if I wasn't in love with a lot of the plot, and I think Annalee Newitz is just a really creative sci-fi writer. I really want them to come out with something more. I know they just released a nonfiction that I wasn't necessarily interested in, but waiting for more fiction. Then the last book that I finished for this month and the Trans Writers Readathon, I finished like 40 minutes ago. How long have I been filming this? I literally waited to finish that book on the last day of the month. I never film in March, a March wrap up, but I don't have time this week to film. Anyway, the book that I read was You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi, who I have read twice before and enjoyed both of those books. I was so excited when this was released, but I saw a bunch of bad reviews come out about it because of the nature of the romance. Wasn't planning on reading it, but I had it on my library audiobook list for so long because has one of my favorite audiobook narrators, and I was like, even if there is some weird stuff with the romance, because I've really loved the themes of the other books by Akwaeke Emezi, maybe I'm going to love this. And unfortunately, I did not. This was bad. This is not good. Our main character, Faye, is a widow, lost the love of her life 5 years ago, and hasn't been able to date since. And at the very beginning of this book, she thrusts herself into the dating scene, sleeps with a guy, isn't really into him, starts seeing a different guy who's one of his friends, and they start taking it slow, but she's not feeling it. And over halfway into the book, even though this is in the synopsis, she goes to meet his family and she immediately becomes obsessed with his dad. So yeah, this book discusses grief, and I think what discussion of grief it did have was good. It wasn't that much of the book because it is more focused on the romance. I really could not get behind this insta-love romance between people who are 20 years apart. I do not like age gap romances. That's just not for me. And I wasn't really sure how this was going to resolve going into it, so I didn't know how involved that relationship was going to be. But I thought it was really gross how insta-lovey their relationship was when there is a very clear power dynamic between them of a famous older man and a young woman who is trying to take off her career. I thought that was really gross. And the way that they latch onto each other so quickly is not healthy. If you're trying to have a discussion about how people struggle with grief and how to cope with it in a healthy way, this is not the way to go about it. Everybody in this book is telling these two that, hey, it's really fucked up that you went from like seeing a son to seeing his dad immediately. And they're like, oh, but it's love. You met this person like a week ago. It is not. I wanted to be able to like the other stuff around it, but I just didn't think that there was enough substance around this relationship that I can't get on board for. Maybe other readers can get on board for, but I am not interested in reading any sort of romance, especially realistic romance, that I do not think is healthy or desirable. So this was not for me, and I'm going to be giving it a 2-star. Luckily, it was short. So these are all the books that I ended up reading in March. I have some exciting stuff coming out in April. I have another episode of 5-Star Finder coming out, so that'll be my next video, so look out for that. If you've read any of these books, please let me know what you thought of them down below. I'd love to discuss them with you. Let me know what you read in March, and maybe what you're reading in April. If you would like to follow me anywhere, my Instagram, my Goodreads, my book club, my Etsy, where I sell crochet bookish dolls and reader spreadsheets, all of that is in the singular link in the description. And as always, I will see you in the next one.